Alright, this is part 3 of the Northwest Allen County Schools Earth and Life Science Benchmark Tests Review podcast for the 8th grade. We'll go ahead and get started then with Chapter 10. Chapter 10 is covering biology, and it's talking about the first topic is what defines a species of organisms and what makes them a species. And if we just look at the definition of a species, which is a group of similar organisms that can mate with each other and produce offspring that can also mate and reproduce, that defines, of course, what it is and then also what makes it a species. And so we have to look at the idea of it being a living thing that can mate with another of its same species and then produce offspring that are able to do the same thing. So it's not going to end with that generation. The next topic is what are the differences between plants and animals, even though they are both eukaryotes. Remember, they are both eukaryotic organisms, which means their nuclei contain, or their cells contain nuclei. And plants then are autotrophs, which means they make food with photosynthesis, whereas animals are heterotrophs, which means they have to eat others for food. So, of course, an animal is something that has to eat another organism, either another consumer, which has eaten something else before then, or they have to be able to eat a producer, which would be the plants. The next one is when given a classification chart, tell what organisms are related the closest and which ones are not closely related. So you need to look at the different levels, and they are domain, kingdom, phylum, class, order, family, genus, and species, and that's from the highest or the most broad, which is domain, down to the most specific, which is species. And remember, the more levels they have in common, the more related they are. So if they share, for example, the same species, they are the same type of organism. They're able to mate and reproduce and create new offspring. Whereas when we're looking at something that's in the same order, for example, we can see that there are some similarities, but there are also at the same time some important differences. The next topic is what is homeostasis? Homeostasis is the maintenance of stable internal conditions. It's basically why we're able to exist as we do right now, because of this process. The next one is to know the 3 different domains and what organisms fall into each of the categories. The first domain is domain bacteria, which includes prokaryotes, or cells without nuclei. And then bacteria are some examples of that, obviously from the name. Then there's domain Archaea, which are old ancient organisms that exist in only harsh conditions. And then domain Eukarya, which these are the eukaryotes, which means they are cells with nuclei. And these includes plants, fungi, protists, and animals. The next one is looking at a taxonomic key and what it's used for. And this is a taxonomic key here. It's a way to try to identify an organism by basically playing a game of 20 questions. Very simple to use. It's just a way to help scientists figure out what it is they're looking at without having to spend a lot of time trying to look for pictures and matching it up and spending days trying to Google it, for example. And the last topic in Chapter 10 is knowing how organisms are placed into kingdoms. And for example, we can compare plants, animals, and fungi, and we can see that plants can make their own food while the other ones have to eat other organisms. Then you can also see that for the fungi, they're decomposers, whereas the animals can be consumers at several other levels, for example, scavengers, or omnivores, or carnivores, or herbivores. Chapter 11 we skipped over. We actually just covered that with a regular chapter test, and that then moves on to Chapter 12, which we just wrapped up a couple days ago. And with that then, I'm going to recommend that you watch the Chapter 12 podcast, because everything on the study guide is actually already covered in that podcast, and I go into a lot more detail on the idea of Punnett squares to refresh your memory on that. I'm guessing it's still very fresh though, because you just took the test on it the other day, and you should be ready to go on that. If you have any questions, you can jump onto My Big Campus and ask them on there, or you can ask them during class during the couple days of review time that we have. Good luck on the final exam, and have a great time in the next 4 years at Carroll Freshman Center and Carroll High School.